Yes, we are live once again, the Reentry Connect podcast. Yes, we got a special guest tonight, the ones you've been waiting for, Mr. Kurt Danysh, like Spanish, the director of Tomorrow's Neighbors. We appreciate him being on this podcast tonight with the special title of the Peer Reentry Support. Yes, indeed, it is him. I'm telling you, once you hear his story, the things he's doing throughout the state, throughout the community, throughout the country, man, it's very powerful. I'm so appreciative to have him here. I'm telling y'all remember what this podcast is all about. The Reentry Connect podcast is about supporting. It's about bringing awareness. It's about informing others of different things out here in the world. Those who are transitioning, those who are in prison, those who are in halfway houses, those who are recovery houses. Everybody can learn something. It's never too late to learn. So without further ado, we're going to get right into it. Mr. Kurt Danysh. Mr. Kurt Danysh, go ahead and introduce yourself, man. We appreciate you being here today. And I'm just so excited to hear all the information and the knowledge that you're going to tell us about, man, as far as being incarcerated and coming out and just making a success of a lot. You know, it's really inspiring, man. I can't wait to hear everything you have to say. So without further ado, Mr. Danysh.
I appreciate it, and I appreciate being here, and I love what you're doing. As soon as I saw your podcast, I said, man, I got to get on there. Absolutely. So my name is Kurt Danysh. I'm the executive director of Tomorrow's Neighbors, and we are a nonprofit reentry organization in Cumberland County, Pennsylvania. Before that, for 24 years, I was nothing more than DL 4879, right? I mean, I was incarcerated from the age of 18 to 40. That is what I was. That was my future. That is the only thing I saw. I was sentenced to 22 and a half to 60 years at the age 18. I wasn't even alive that long when they gave me those years. Wow. Felt my life was over. Spent the first 5 years just going to the hole, just angry at anybody wearing a uniform, blamed everybody for my circumstances except myself. And I'll be honest, it was the lifers inside that kind of sparked the change in me, because they sat there and they said, you know, there was one guy in particular, and he sat me down and he said, man, why are you punishing yourself? And I said, what are you talking about, old head? You know, punishing myself. And he said, you go to the hole every Christmas, you go to the hole every birthday. And he knew the anniversary of my crime. And he said, every anniversary of your crime, you go to the hole. He said, you are punishing yourself. And I didn't get it right in that moment, but that set in with me. And I was, right? Because I went to prison for third-degree murder. So I took somebody's life, a crime I deeply regret. And I didn't deal with that inside, right? So I just put on that armor of like, man, I don't care. I'm just here. You know what I mean? This is my life. This is what I got to make and do. Mm-hmm. But he was the same guy that sat me down and he said, man, like, your day's going to come. He said, I'm not getting that day. I'm not going home. You're sitting here, and yeah, 22 years is a long time. You're going to be an old man when you leave compared to what you are now. He said, but that day's going to come. And the question is, are you going to be ready for it? So it was really with that encouragement. He said, you know, like, sit your ass in school, right? He said, go to school, do something with your time. And I went into prison, a ninth grade dropout. I thought I knew everything, right? But I wasn't stupid by any means, right? Most criminals aren't stupid. We know how to make money. So on his encouragement, I started going into school. And I mean, the moment I sat foot in those classrooms, I stopped going to the hole. Everything changed because I started seeing myself different. I started seeing confidence in myself. So the more educational diplomas I got, the more programs I participated in, the more I started seeing something different in myself. And it was during that transition that I started looking at myself and looking at the decisions that led me to prison, right? Like those steps, you really start doing that introspection that a few people in life get a chance to do, unless you go through an extreme situation. Mm-hmm. And it took many years, but I had to come to terms with what I did, and I had to sit and feel that, right? Like I couldn't run from it. I couldn't get high anymore because that's what I did for the first 5 years in jail. Wow. So I had to sit there and really like kind of deal with the pain of what I did to a lot of people. Mm-hmm. And then I had to go through the F word, the forgiveness. You know, I had to forgive other people in my life. I had to try to forgive myself, which is something I still struggle with. Mm-hmm. But with that process, I started seeing a future for myself. Okay. And I was lucky enough that, you know, in the 90s when I fell, they took all the college from us, right? So you went to jail, they told you to get better, but they didn't give you the tools to do it. Exactly. So I got very lucky at the end of my bit that first I was selected as a peer support specialist in prison. And they sat down 20 of us. For those that don't know what a peer support specialist is, They put 20 of us in a room and said, we're going to train you to give emotional and mental support to other inmates that are struggling. And we said, this is a joke. Nobody's going to sit down and talk to us. Why would they do that?
Yeah.
But then they told us they were going to pay us 51 cents an hour. So we were like, we'll give it a shot because that's top pay, right?
It's top pay. Hey, I know.
Absolutely. But the program was powerful. It changed the entire. I was at Frackville for 20 years. Frackville is a very tight institution. Everything's regimented. On average, you're spending 20 hours in a cell, not because you're in the hole, because you're in Frackville. So it just changed the dynamics of the facility. Now, when you had young guys who came to jail and didn't know how to survive, they could come to us. They could ask questions. People's mothers died. They had someone they could talk to. Someone didn't get along with their cellie. Instead of putting hands on them or worse, they could kind of come and ask the older guys, how do I get out of this situation? Mm-hmm. So I did that for about 8 years, and I started approaching my release. And I was scared to come home. And I always tell everybody that being scared to come home isn't the same thing as wanting to stay in prison, right? Mm-hmm. We all want to go home, but we were scared, or I was scared. And I was scared how to interact with the public. I felt like prison just stained me. I'm going to come home. My sense of humor is skewed. I don't know how to deal with women, right? Because I ain't been around women in so long. Wow. So around this time, I got accepted into the Pell Grant Second Chance program. So it was an experimental program to see if we give education to individuals, will they not come back? And if not, then they were going to extend the Pell Grants for all inmates, which they did this year, thank God. Wow. But I had a college professor who challenged me. He said, you got to come up with a business plan if you want a business degree. And I said, I was never on the internet. I was never on a cell phone. What do I know about starting a business? And he explained that a business, you got to find a need that's not being met and meet it. So I always told him about reentry, how scared I was to go home. He said, well, how would it be better? And I started saying, if they did the peer support program in reentry, it would be better. He said, that's your business. So he challenged me, and I came up with a business plan. I turned it in. He gave me an A+. So for me, that was the end of the project. He kept on me. He said, when are you going to do this? When are you going to do this? He said, if you do this job, when you go home, that felony is going to be an asset instead of a detriment to you. Wow. So with his encouragement, I literally incorporated Tomorrow's Neighbors while I was incarcerated. And I remember laying in my bunk, trying to come up with a name for the company. And I was like, what should I call it? And it came to me, I'm a man of God, so I believe in God. And it came in my head that today's prisoners are tomorrow's neighbors.
Wow.
That, so 90, go ahead.
So real quick question. So you planned this out prior to your release?
Yeah, I incorporated it a year before my minimum. So in 2017, I incorporated Tomorrow's Neighbors. And that was a commitment because that's $300, right? And I'm not a guy with a lot of money. $300 was a lot of money to me in prison. I came home with $2,500 saved over the course of 24 years. It took me a long time to save that money. But I sacrificed $300, and to me, that was a commitment. There's no turning back. And we're not supposed to incorporate in jail, right? Like you can't run a business in jail. And I had that argument with a lieutenant. I said, I'm not running it. I just incorporate it, right? I'll run it when I go home. So then I came up for parole, and I was ready, man. I'm like, man, I did everything good. Yeah. I haven't had a write-up in so long. I mean, I'm a model inmate at this point, but the parole board was real quick to remind me, you also got 20 misconducts from them first 5 years. Wow. So I ended up with a 2-year parole hit. So, okay. And I went up there, and I'm telling you, talk about taking the wind out of my sails. When they said 2 years, I was done. I mean, wow. I went through suicidal feelings, during the beginning of my bit. That brought me right back. And I said, man, I don't know how I'm going to do 2 more years. I just don't. Yeah. But again, it was that lifer population going, man, I know that hurts, man, but you got 2 more years, you're going home. Wow. And thank God I made it the next 2 years. When I came up, I ended up getting parole. COVID just started in 2020.
How did that feel? 2020, you had a 2-year hit. You went through a lot of depression. You went through suicidal thoughts. And finally, they said you're granted parole. How did that feel to know that your future was right at your hands, at your fingertips, at the door?
It was hard to comprehend because even on the day I left, it didn't feel real. Like I had this thought, like something's going to happen, something's going to get pulled back. I mean, I couldn't even imagine what my life was going to be like. And because it was COVID, like, you always envision your head, I'm saying goodbye to my buddies on the way out. You know what I mean? Like instead, it was like everyone's still sleeping. I'm pushing a cart out, a couple guys out the window, because it was a big deal. Someone goes home after 20 years, you know? But my mom, my sister picked me up, and I just remember sitting in that car going, the world's still here, right? Like it blew me away. And I didn't sleep for 3 days, 72 hours awake. Could not, I'd lay in bed, close my eyes, could not fall asleep. My brain just could not comprehend what was going on around me. And I had a phone for the first time in my life. So, you know, I'm trying to figure this thing out. I don't know Wi-Fi to cellular. I was in that phone for days. It was so much fun.
Wow. Wow. So you started this, you came home, you know, after going through all you've been through in prison. Now, I know that most people that go to prison, yes, it is supposed to be a life-changing experience. It's supposed to be a form of rehabilitation. But we know that oftentimes most people with short times, you know, they don't really learn their lesson. They go in and out, 1 to 2s, 2 to 4s. They max it out, come back, got about 8 numbers. Then they bragging about that, which is not thorough. A lot of people think that that's something to brag about. But here it is. You spent over 20 years in prison. We all mess up in the beginning. You know, we try to get our act together. But then, like you said, it's a moment when you have that changing experience. But you decided to turn your life around, and you decided that you wanted to incorporate, so I'm quite sure you read a lot of books while you in there. Am I correct?
Yes. And I want to make it clear that I didn't turn around at the gate. I turned around halfway through my bit.
Years later.
I had a conversation with a man in prison that said, we're all criminals one time. And I corrected him. I said, I'm not a criminal. I said, I haven't committed the crime. At that point, it was like 15 years. Wow. I said, I have no intention of ever committing a crime again. I don't identify as a criminal. Yeah, wow. And that was drastic to this guy. He was like, what do you mean? I said, I live by the criminal code because of where I live, right? Like that's prison. We know what that is. You know, I don't cross that line. But when I go home, man, I'm a citizen.
You said absolutely.
That's it. That's all I want to be.
You're no longer a number or a product of the state. Yeah. You know, so tell me. So in 2020, you came home, you re-entered society. How long did it take for you to get your actual corporation running? Or did you automatically get into it? Did you have to work? Did you have to find a job, shelter? How did that look? Because you went away when you was a kid, but then you came home as like a full-grown man. How did that feel like? What was the process like?
I mean, it was hard because in the beginning, right? Like any business, you got to fake it till you make it, right? I mean, I started the mentorship. You know, I got my feet under myself first, right? Like I'm not going to come out and start mentoring someone when I don't know what I'm doing. Okay. Fortunately for me, I knew people that came home before me, and they were my mentors as soon as I came home. I got a buddy named Danny. You know, he was home at that point for 8 years before me, and he was the guy I would get pictures from, and I'd see him out there, so I knew it was possible. But once I started getting stable, we would start, you know, mentoring with people, and I guess what really changed it was my parole officer knocked on my door Sunday morning at 8 o'clock in the morning. Scared the heck out of me, right? Because they don't normally do that. Okay. But he said, a guy just came home after 20 years. Would you start meeting with him? So that was like, wow, like this guy's watching what I'm doing, you know, because I would explain to him, like I'm mentoring other guys, and the way parole's written, like we don't even know if that's okay, right? Are we associated with formerly incarcerated or what? Mm-hmm. And then we had a reentry roundtable in Cumberland County that the first lady, Tom Wolf's wife, came to. Okay. And that blew it up. The DOC came, the secretary of DOC came. And so it kind of put on the map what we were doing. Yeah. And then, you know, the big jump was in Cumberland County. We needed reentry housing. There was none. And I joined the Cumberland County Reentry Coalition. I sat on the executive committee, and I always talked about we need reentry housing. We need reentry housing because there's nowhere for them to go, except in the halfway houses in Harrisburg. And we know halfway houses don't work, right? They're halfway back every time as soon as you come.
Absolutely.
So it was someone at the Cumberland County level that said, look, a grant is coming open. There's COVID money left. Why don't you put a proposal in for reentry housing? And I was like, man, who's going to give an ex-con who's running an organization money to run a reentry house? They recommended I do it anyway. And I did my diligence. I started getting support letters from everybody I could think of. And my whole argument was, if you give me this money, I'll save you $4 million in incarceration costs. Because I did the math.
You did your homework. You did your homework.
I did the homework. I eliminated every skepticism they would have about me. And there's no other explanation except God in my eyes. I got a phone call and they said, congratulations, we're going to give you the grant and you're going to open a reentry house.
Wow. So when you received that grant, here it was, you didn't think it was possible, somebody coming out of prison, because it's unheard of. A lot of these organizations you see out here with these nonprofits, they struggling to keep the lights and they struggling to get the grants because they're small profits. So you turn around and got a grant. How much was that grant that they gave you?
We ended up with a $1 million grant, which funded the house for 5 years.
Wow. So it funded the house for 5 years.
And we have 13 beds in our house. So we can, for the first year, we're going to stick at 8 because, we're learning. We want to make sure this is good. The way we do our house is so different than the traditional. We don't search property because why am I searching your property? I'm going to search it on Tuesday. You're going to leave on Wednesday and come back in. All I'm telling you is I don't trust you. Okay. And we vet who comes in our house. We meet with them while they're still incarcerated. Okay. We make sure we're serving their needs, that they're on the right, path. They're not coming in and disrupting, because our house, we specialize in long-term incarceration. Yeah. We've had people, 10, 15, 20, 30 years incarcerated live in our house. Wow. Those are special needs,
Absolutely.
It's more reentry.
And I want to touch on that too. So for a lot of the people that are listening right now, whether you're incarcerated or you're getting ready to come out from a certain housing, when people or organizations or transitional housing are ready to screen you, yes, they're going to have to ask you information. Yes, they're going to have to know your background. Yes, they're going to have to see the things that you've been through. Because you got to remember, we got to make sure you're the perfect candidate that's going to fill that spot. We're not looking to just throw you in there so that you can just come out and just do whatever you want. No, we're actually trying to help you to success. We're trying to help you transition correctly.
Yep. And our one measure is motivation for success. And I know that word in the DOC has a bad element, but we just want to know, because as well as I do, there's community leaders that are incarcerated right now that if they were in our community, they make a huge impact. All they need is that support to get that platform so they can make that big impact in their community. That's who we're looking for. We want to foster them so they can foster the community. I'm not going to change the world, but those guys are.
Absolutely.
So that's who we want to support.
And that's how you do it. See, a lot of people, they look at these transitional houses, especially ones that you offer or specific people offer, and they say, oh, they want to ask too much, or they judge me. They all up in our info, all up in my business. Because some of them, that's truth be told, like you mentioned earlier, a lot of individuals don't have a place to go, especially after spending 15, 20 years in prison. You don't have a place to go, even if you had a house years ago.
You outlived your support system.
You outlived your support, and it's like, where do you turn now? So it's best to always humble yourself when you do reach out to an organization that's willing to provide living quarters for you. You got to be able to accept whatever they're offering, whatever, like I said, the screening that they're giving, because a lot of people always frown upon that. And it's no, we're not judging you by your crime. We're not judging you by a lot of things. We believe in second chances for everybody. But at the same time,
I don't Google guys on purpose because I'm not judging what your crime was. I'm judging what you've done inside and what you want to do in the future.
In the future, and that makes a big impact. What have you done inside? A lot of people, and I don't mean to get off the subject just a little bit, but a lot of people, when they even go to the board, they go to the board and they say, okay, what have you did the past 15 years? Oh, I got my GED. That's all? Yeah. When it's all these other programs and different things you can get involved in, there's plenty of books in this library that can teach you things. You didn't bother doing anything else, and then they wonder why they get a hit. Let alone, if they were in and out the hole. But I want you to continue. So okay. So what type of impact has Tomorrow's Neighbor had? Because mind you, you say you came home in 2020, so you only been in operation for about how long now?
Well, about 3 years, and the house has only been open for, I think it's like 9 months now.
So 9 months. Wow. So you've been, even before the house opened, were you working? Did you have stable housing? What was going on at that time?
Well, for me, when I first came home, you talking about my employment or the people?
Yeah, your employment, just in general. What led up to, okay, the house, now I'm full-blown director. Everything is legit now.
My first job was a peer support specialist, right? Because I wanted to do that. I wanted to help people. And and they hired me, no problem. Let me say that if you're a peer support specialist inside and you want a job when you come home, they're waiting for you. Like, they will hire you.
Wow.
But they're not going to pay you the best, right?
Okay.
It's a sacrifice. I made $13 an hour doing that. Then I went to Amazon for $19 an hour because it was more money to move boxes around than to help people.
Okay.
But I had to keep the lights on. I had a fiance at this point. So, so then I thought, unfortunately, I got hurt at Amazon, which forced me not to be able to work. But then I didn't have an excuse not to just do Tomorrow's Neighbors full time. Wow. So I just went full blown into Tomorrow's Neighbors. And that's when the opportunity for housing came up. I didn't start being able to get paid from Tomorrow's Neighbors until the beginning of 2023.
Wow.
So it was a sacrifice. You know, it was something I wanted to do in my life. And there was a lot of pressure in my life saying, maybe try something else, right? Like do something, because I have a good business mind. I could start a business and make some good money. But this is what I want to do. I want to do what those lifers did for me inside. Wow. For people coming home. And I hope those lifers are coming home soon so I can serve them the way they serve me.
Yeah. And you could shed a little light on that, because we know that oftentimes, you know, people on the outside, you know, don't know that people that are on the inside that are serving life or long sentences, like you said, outgrow their support system. But we forget that they're still there. You know, we forget that these are some of the most intelligent people on the face of the earth.
And when I came home, I told my mom that. She said, you know, you're home now. This is your support system's here. And I said, my support system's still in prison.
Because it started there.
That for 24 years, that's who supported me in tough times, hard times. When I felt suicidal, they were the guys that let me cry on their shoulder, right? Like, I mean, that's real. We don't show that in prison movies, but that's prison.
That's prison. Wow.
And so for me, it was hard leaving them. And I feel guilty. I sit here, I have a cell phone in my hand. I have an apartment that is huge compared to a prison cell. I feel guilty every day that men that got me to where I am are still inside a prison cell, and I'm out here living this life. You know what I mean? So it's
you're living in a bathroom.
Yeah,
that's the crazy thing.
A parking lot size room. Yep.
A parking lot size room, and people don't understand. And I share this too with a lot of the young fellas when I speak in a lot of organizations. That just imagine if you lock yourself in the bathroom and you just stay there throughout the whole day. People spend time in spaces like that for years at a time, pacing back and forth, walking miles without leaving the cell, walking miles without going out to the yard on the track. This is real torment. This is real. The eighth amendment cruel and unusual punishment.
Even out of the cell, I spent 20 years at Frackville. I never went more than a square mile in my life in 20 years.
Wow.
And that's why when I come home now, I look up at the sky and I see, you know, constellations. I don't know the name of them, but I see the same constellations I saw inside. And I have them moments like I can remember walking across that compound, seeing, you know, those stars and just wishing so much to be on the other side of that fence.
Wow. And that's powerful. That's powerful. And that now far as the programming within your Tomorrow's Neighbors. Now, did you have something that was like formed around like the 8 steps of like the successful entry? What type of things did that
I identified 5 stages of incarceration while I was incarcerated. Like when I did the Tomorrow's Neighbors plan, I sat down with parole violators. I sat down, I said, why are you back in prison? And you got to filter through, you know, oh, my PO is just a whatever, you know. Okay. But it came down to 2 things. People felt alone and they felt overwhelmed. Yeah. And that's what we do at Tomorrow's Neighbors. We address those 2 things. Resources we can give you, so can other people. But you're not going to utilize a resource if those 2 things aren't addressed first. So what we identified was 8 steps to successful reentry. And the significant part, I think, for us is that the first 4 start inside. And that's why we start our mentorship while someone's still incarcerated, sometimes 6 months before they come home. So our 8 steps, I'll run through them real quick. And it's terminate criminal thinking, because you got to have that shift. That's got to change. Separate yourself from negative influences. And I always remind people, and I go in prisons and say this, not just the inmates, right? That can be staff. That can be negative influences around you, you know? Yeah. Participate in rehabilitative and education opportunities, not because they tell you to, because even if you only get 10% out of those programs serve me in life right now. As much as I resented having to take them, I look back now and I go, thank God I have emotional intelligence now. Thank God I'm not a slave to my emotions anymore, that I'm not bitter. The fourth one is liberate yourself from incarceration. And how do you do that? You got to make parole. What do you got to do? You got to stop getting misconducts. You got to start doing things that's going to make you stand out to parole. That's in our interest, but we resent it because they're telling us to do it, so we don't do it. And it keeps us in jail longer. I mean, that's how much they mess with our brains in there, that we start thinking we're winning by staying in prison.
Wow.
And then the four, when you come home, is, reintegrate back into society. Easier said than done. That's where the peer support comes in, and you really need that support.
Okay.
Conciliate with the individuals and community you have harmed. We're real big on community service. I can never make up for the crime I committed. Someone lost their life, but I can exhaust myself every day trying, even though it's never going to do it. And I can't do it to my victim, but I can do it for my community. I can do it for helping other reentrants coming out, steering youth away from the criminal justice system, affiliating with positive influences. When people come home, a lot of times we ask people like, well, what do you want to do with your time? And they're like, I don't know, man. I just got high before. I don't know what to do with my time. So we really got to develop that positive use of time out here. And then motivate yourself through positive use of time. You got to be motivated every day to get up. Because some people come home and they're like, this is all I lived for, was to come home. But I said, well, now you're home. What are you going to do with it? And that's the part we got to start thinking about while we're still inside, because it's not enough to make it out here. We got to come out here and succeed, man. And we can. It happens every day. Just don't make the news because it's not sexy.
Absolutely. So let me ask you, Mr. Kerr. So right now, I know that there's a lot of people watching, viewing, or sharing this. This podcast is over a lot of platforms. So if you could give some motivation or encouragement to the viewers, that are transitioning from anywhere they're at, any position that they're at, what type of motivation and encouragement would you give them at this point?
First thing I tell them is they're not alone. Okay. Because people always whisper to me when they're struggling. And I said, what are you whispering for, man? Everybody's struggling. I mean, we're dealing with post-incarceration syndrome. We're dealing with moral injury. You don't even have to experience the trauma, but witnessing trauma inside. What we go through coming home is the same as a soldier coming home from war, minus the valor and the heroism. I don't compare myself to a soldier. Yeah. But you live in conditions you don't know if you're going to live, brotherhoods you form. You lose people, and then you come home and they say, be normal. And you don't even know what normal is anymore. You're redefining it, and your family doesn't understand, and they want you to talk about it, and we don't know what to say. And I'll say this, that traditionally when people come home from incarceration or go through a traumatic experience, we tend to gravitate toward people that can relate to our experience. Traditionally, that meant we had to go back in the street, right? Because that's where people that did time usually are. Wow. So what we try to do at Tomorrow's Neighbors, and what you're doing with your podcast every day, you're creating this positive body of individuals that say, I can relate to that experience.
Yes, indeed.
But I'm propelling forward. I'm going to succeed going forward. And I'm going to bring you with me, and I'm going to support you along the way. Mm-hmm. And I was maybe arrogant when I thought we would do mentorship at the house, because the men that reside in our house support one another. And it's a beautiful thing. Not that we don't have to do anything, but it's one thing when I show a guy how to do something, but then when I watch him show two other guys how to do it, that's success. I mean, that's what we're trying to do.
It. Yeah. That's it. And that's the delegation that, like you said, that's the delegation that we like to see. We like to see others helping others, people helping people, no matter who you are, what you've been through, whatever your circumstances. That's what it is. That's what it's all about.
And here's the good news, too, is that those of us with lived experience, as they call it now, they're bringing us to tables. They're listening to us. They're admitting we don't know what to do. We don't know how to help you. How can we help you? You know what I mean? And when there's not a table to sit at, I tell everyone, build a table and invite them to it. Because that's what Tomorrow's Neighbors did. We developed a table and we said, we know how to keep people out of jail. More support, less rules, right? We don't need more rules. We got enough structure. We need support. And that's what it comes down to.
Hey, and that's powerful, man. You really broke down a lot of things, concerning, like you said, Tomorrow's Neighbors, the things you've been through, your past history. We really appreciate all of this. So, Mr. Kurt, if somebody wanted to contact you, wanted to get involved, maybe even be a resident at your house, the house that you facilitate and you're the director of, how can people go about doing this?
Well, you can contact me directly at my email, which is kurtdanysh@gmail.com. if you have a loved one that's incarcerated that is interested in our program, they can reach out to us. They can write us at 343 East North Street, Carlisle, Pennsylvania, 17013. But most of the prisons right now, if they reach out to their counselor and say, I'm interested in getting to the Cumberland House, which is the name of our house, most of the counselors will contact us or just give them an application, let them fill it out and scan it and send it to us. But if a guy's not comfortable with that and he wants to mail it to us, because we know we don't always want staff seeing everything that's on applications, they can send it to us or have their loved one contact us. And we set up emails and communicate with the individuals while they're still incarcerated to make sure we're serving everything they need when they come home. And let me add this. We specialize in long-term incarceration. Long-term guys don't have any money. We have built into our budget that if you're long-term, you've served 20 plus years, we can give 2 months free rent because we understand that. And we don't want these guys rushing in that first job and 5 years from now still having that first crappy job. We want people to swim, not tread water. We're here to kind of literally lift these guys up. So help them lift themselves because we're not doing the heavy lifting. They do it themselves.
Absolutely. And we appreciate that you expounding on that because like you said, that 20 plus year mark, that, is recommended. That's very important. And not to say that the people that have shorter terms, there may be other resources as well that we could provide here in the future.
We do have some short-term guys too. We don't only do long-term because we think the short-term guys benefit from the long-term guys.
Yeah, that's cool. But, that's a great strategy.
So we have a little bit of everything in ours. We have county guys, we have state guys, we have a federal guy that's going to come in. So
yeah, so that's great. And here it is. Once again, it's your host, Keenan Hudson with the Reentry Connect podcast. We're going to allow Mr. Kirk Danysh go ahead and give you accolades or anybody you want to shout out. We really appreciate having you here on the show. Like I said, we definitely got to have you on again at another round table as well. So feel free,
I love it, man. I love what you're doing. I'm going to give you a shout out because this is powerful. And I love seeing guys come out that are impacting their communities the same way they impacted their communities inside. Because those guys inside were trying to stop the young guys from going out and harming their communities and coming back to prison. And now we're out here doing the same thing. So, man, I love what you're doing. I appreciate this opportunity. Keep it up. Any way we can support you, we're going to support you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Mr. Kirk Dan. So without further ado, we're going to definitely get ready to end the show here on the Reentry Connect podcast, with the peer reentry support. Again, you had it from Mr. Kirk Danysh, like Spanish, you know what I'm saying, tomorrow's neighbors. Y'all go ahead and hit him up, as he mentioned, here at kirkdanish@gmail.com, and be looking forward to hearing from him in the future as well. Because we have some unfinished business that we're going to definitely bring to the world by storm. So without further ado, everybody have a good rest of your day or good evening from wherever part of the country you're in or whatever part of the world you're in. We thank you.